Okay, this is part 11. We are going to begin painting other types of maps besides color maps. We will add to this color map a bump map and a specular map, and that's the way it's going to finish through this particular video. And then one more on lighting, I propose. You can make little adjustments in the UV window. See, I'm moving the UV just for key parts, key features like the knuckles, if you want those final touches to line up a little bit better to your map before you move on to other types of maps. And one for the nail. Here's the lines, the knuckle, looking at the back, that line that falls right in the back of the knuckle. I can identify where that line is, which correlates to the UV. Just nudge that a little bit up or down, side to side where necessary. That could be all part of polishing the UV just to get agreement between what you want to look in your image versus what's showing up in the shell. Little nudges here or there with the nail. So moving these around, I really don't have to consider repainting them. Just keep a good eye on the UV. Make sure no lines are going outside your painted areas. Something like that. And here's the thumb too, that could use a little bit of stretching, I should say nudging, here or there. Maybe like something like that. I could do the same thing on the lines on the palm of the hand, at the front of the hand. Those creases there. Line them up a little more naturally with how they fall on your own hand. Just by moving the UVs around a little bit, nudging them. Not too far, just keep an eye here in the UV window. Make sure nothing is overlapping. You see the blue part. If it turns bright red, you know your overlapping parts. And with tweaking these, you're minimizing this line, these shell edges as they come together as good as you can. And it's not necessary to be perfect. We'll have some visible seams, but to this degree it's very acceptable. So next what we're going to do is create a bump map, and after that a specular map. You can see right now the color map is on it, giving you an appearance of color. It looks a bit shiny or sweaty because we are going to control the shiny parts of the specular map in a bit. And when we look really close, we can see some of the imperfections which I mentioned are acceptable, and some of the lines on the front and the back forming the knuckles, but they look plastic and smooth, and the bump map's going to take care of that. And for the really shiny parts, the specular map's going to control that. You might have remembered, I think I said in the second week or so when we looked at shaders, what consists, this is an example, by the way, of the head. I think I showed you showing some human skin. Anyway, what consists of a color, specular, and bump map together for a very primitive yet effective shader that can describe skin. We can have here in this characterized face the shiny parts at the edge of his eyes, right? And maybe a little bit of shininess or waxiness on the cheek, a little bit of highlight here on the edge of the lip, and then where the cheek is, it's not quite as shiny, and maybe a little more shiny and waxy near the ear. So the shininess has to do with the specular map, that one there, and where you see some imperfections and bumps in the skin and wrinkles and that vein popping out, of course, and the stubble, that would be the bump map, or it could be a normal map that you use to do that. In this case, we're going to use the bump. So all three together become channels in this shader to render skin-like texture. And if we'd like to go even further with it, the Arnold-based shaders that have subsurface scattering involved in it, which we'll talk about later, these more advanced shaders can do effects that have much more photorealistic light behavior. Subsurface scattering means the light actually enters the skin and scatters about inside it. Here we have some different lighting studies of a posed hand with the light placed in front and behind, so you could see the effect of what subsurface scattering is artistically, how it passes through tissues and membranes and light gets caught inside. This, of course, may look differently with different skin colors, skin types, with different poses of the hand and the proximity, placement, location, and temperature of the light source. Also considering any kinds of effects of self-shadowing, it all goes together to make a more alive appearance of the skin. Well, this all has to do with shaders and lighting working together. We're going to start simple by just using the color map here that we created in Photoshop, of course with the shells, and attached to a blend material for the moment. Okay, we start creating a simple bump map. We're going to want these lines and edges and creases, as I mentioned, to pop inward and outward, not just lay smooth like plastic. Let's start by going back to Photoshop and bringing up our color image. This is the same image that is already attached as a file texture to the color node in Maya. The first thing we're going to do is desaturate the image so we get rid of all color. We'll go up to, I know you can't see the menu, it's a little bit out of the menu, but it's under Image. It's in Photoshop Adjustments, Desaturate. I'm sure you know Photoshop and where that is already, and so take out all the image, all the color from the image. Next, I'm going to bring down the brightness of the overall image quite a bit. So in Photoshop, I'm hitting the menu that says Image, then Adjustments. You could do an adjustment layer for this if you like to work that way, but I'm just going to Brightness, and I'm bringing the brightness way down. And contrast, I can leave a little bit higher. So in my image I have a brightness all the way down and contrast almost all the way up. It might be different because I started out with a really light pale skin image, so it needs a little more darkening, a little more extremity. But yours might be different depending on the color of your skin, of course, and the differences. But your goal is to get it overall darker for the bump map. Next, I'm going to accentuate the darks and the lights. Using the burn and dodge tool here in Photoshop, I'm going to burn in the darks, the mediums, and make them darker, and then I'm going to dodge the lighters. In other words, put more of an extreme contrast further between dark and light. I'll put the exposure, right now I'm on burn in, I'm burning shadows, and then putting exposure maybe around 9 or 10%. And painting in. And you see the dark area is getting darker, creasing in more. Here I'm using a pretty wide brush. I'm looking for an overall even tone to the darks throughout. Next, I'm going in the midtones and making them a bit darker. Okay, like that. Last, I'm going in with the dodge brush. I should have said I might have said before I was using the dodge brush. I was using the burn to make darker and the dodge here now to make lighter. So I'm choosing the dodge brush and I'm choosing the highlights. So working on a little bit more, you'd get something that looks like this. You have overall darks uniform and pulling out some lights with the skin pores, wrinkles, imperfections that will become bumpy. The reason we took away all the color and desaturated it is because color doesn't have any meaning in a bump map. It's just value based. So anything that's light is going to be bumped outward and dark bumped inward, or vice versa. And we can reverse that relationship. But it's a black and white value based mechanism only. Now I'm really going in and picking areas I really want to accentuate for wrinkles or edginess, maybe to the nails or to the knuckles. If you want, you could also use curves in Photoshop to find the right balance in your skin tone to make the highlights pop and the base or darker foundation darker, to give that contrast between light and dark. It's up to you what tools you want to use to get that. Okay, something like that we're going to save and bring back into Maya. Going to save. My last one was named Color Text. I like to use capital TEX so it pops out of all the other images that this is a usable texture. And I'm going to change to name this one Bump. Bump text. And JPEG is fine. Minimal compression. Okay, back in Maya, I'm going to click on the hand, right click to Material Attributes. Pops up the attribute editor, and right here, bump mapping, I'm going to click on the checker box to add a file texture right here, and then go find my bump file I created. And there we see it. A little bit bumpy, a little bit textured on there. And we can increase the depth of its bumpiness by clicking on that bump 2D2 node. And if I increase this depth here, you can see how it affects it. So after looking at this, I realized that the bump map that I have here is not quite contrasty enough, which might be a little bit of trial and error you'll have to do. It's bumping in, but it's bumping everything too much all at the same time. What I mean is I go here, start to look like I have super old hands or something, or they're decaying. What I want is the creases just to start to appear. So I'm going to go back to the bump map, make it more contrasty, and then back to Maya. Okay, I touched it up in Photoshop here, keeping away from these edges here where the shells come together, which might overemphasize the bump. We want to leave that in murky shadow where we're trying to bring out contrast and wrinkles and pockmarks or whatever the pores or hairs of the skin there, in starker contrast in the center sections, and you can see over the knuckles and especially around the nails. Okay, I saved that, and now I'm going to try it in Maya again. Back in Maya, if I want to take off a texture in a channel, right click, break connections. That's that old one, and I can put a new one on there. Click texture, a new file, and I think it's called bump text 2 now, and I'll say open. Okay, that's it. That's better. It's a little bit too bumpy still. I'm going to bring it down in the file bump node. You can click around until you find it. Click around these inputs and outputs until you find the right node. It's called bump 2D, and it has bump depth. And just find that so Might find the sweet spot. And you can keep adjusting like that. You might have to actually draw in extra wrinkles or something to get the desired effect. But I don't expect all that effort in this first project. Just getting some bump on there placed like this would be quite nice. And I know the nails are looking a little bit weathered, but those can be smoothed out in the bump too to make it work better. But generally a little bit of texture here is nice. A little bit of texture here is kind of nice. We could even do a fingerprint if we wanted to go in that much detail, but we'll leave it off just to show the instance of a bump on here and what it can do. I added a bit more smoothness to the nails, just kind of fuzzied that out in Photoshop so it's not so bumpy, a little bit shiny, and accentuated some of the wrinkliness of the skin. So yeah, you can putz with it forever, but this is just good enough for this approach. Close-up of the nails, they are not very realistic. It's not going to hold up to any extreme close-up, but it's going to be okay for maybe framing full like this and getting decent lighting. And if you do have nails coming out here, that's something else that you would have to, of course, texture. All right, we're ready for really the next step in the texture process, which is the specular map. It's the palm side before. Slap. Creating a specular map. In Photoshop, you're going to open the last bump texture you made, this one, and I'm going to image adjustments invert. Just taking that same black and white image and giving the reverse of it so it looks like this. Now I'm going back to image adjustment, brightness, contrast. Bringing down the brightness way down and the contrast way up. Might have to do this a couple times. I'm trying to get it really, really dark in there, and the only thing glimmering through are going to be the shiny parts, the most shiny parts of the tissues and the skin and the nails. So the specular parts, and that's why they call it a specular map. Specular equals shininess. Okay, something really dim like this. Okay. Very, very dark. And I'm going into dodge to just bring out my favorite shiny areas, which will be the nails, maybe the pads and the waxy part of the palm. It does not have to be many areas. So I'm bringing up the exposure, the power of the dodge tool much higher. So I'm on dodging, highlights, and I'm really going hot with these on the nails because of the shiniest part. Like that. And I'll do the rest like that. Okay, there are the nails all lit up like a Christmas tree. And I could do some of the cracks because maybe a little bit of extra perspiration might fall in the cracks, in the furrows or wrinkles of the skin or the pores. So I'm emphasizing that by choosing areas to light up. I don't have to do that many of them to give a glistening skin feeling. It feels like an exaggeration here, but once we get it into Maya and plugged into the specular map channel, it will make a little more sense. Okay, there's my specular map. So far, I'm going to go and test it. I'm going to save it as a specular map file. I'm going to follow my naming convention and put SPEC for specular text, so I know easily what that is. I'm going to bring it now into Maya and test it. Okay, back in Maya, and we see all the overall uniform shininess of the hand and how that looks too glistening. So we're going to put the new specular map in it to control that. So I'm going to right click material attributes, and I'm going to put it on specular color. Sorry about that, specular roll off. See, that's why I chose a blend material, and it has this specular roll off feature and specular shading. So I'm going to put it right here, specular roll off. Click the box, the checkerboard, file. Don't worry about that red thing down there. That's just nothing. Okay, I'm choosing specular text. Okay, I can see what happened. It really dulled down the shininess of the overall hand, right? But look at the nails. Look at how now the nails are catching the light, right? But not the skin. That is what a specular map does. And we can see the palm of the hand too. It's a little bit harder to see. This is just the graphics card lighting. It's not even lit with any proper light or rendering, and we can still see that it is a little more waxy or shiny looking on all the parts that I painted white in the specular map. And it's duller in parts I did not paint white. So you can really see how it's catching the edge of the fingernails nicely with a sliver of specular. And just as a test, it may not hold up to really close up, but as I mentioned, we're going to do an intermediate or media shot, so it's going to look okay. All right, this is going to conclude this video on texturing, and the next one we'll talk about lighting, preparing the hand for rendering, and other material and lighting interaction properties. So see you next time.